Make sure you check out my Instagram at Insomniak_horror and the podcast in the description. Okay, so my first story is actually my friend's story. So during these times, things took place when we were all in high school. I already knew about Skinwalkers and the like, but when these things happened to me, I wasn't sure if it really was a skinwalker at the time or something else. I've noticed that most of the people who tell me they've experienced the same phenomenon live in the same area that I do, and my friend is no exception. Let's call him Jay. Jay lives maybe 5 minutes away from me. She told me that in her bus there's this one area that they drive by to drop this kid off. She said she doesn't know why, but it always gives her the creeps. She told me that one early morning, when they were driving in that area to pick him up, all the kids in the bus saw this deer running alongside the bus. Not away from it, but besides it. She said it looked weird as hell. You know, the usual stuff about appearing humanoid. And it didn't look right. Like its limbs were awkwardly bent in a way that didn't seem human. And its eyes were freaky. This is my friend who doesn't know anything about skinwalkers or anything of that mumbo jumbo. So I basically get chills. I tried being reasonable though, because maybe she just saw a regular deer, and since it was dark out, she just got confused, because it's Florida. We're not supposed to get that kind of thing down here. However, Jay swore up and down that it was not a normal deer. She said they all saw it and the bus driver slowed down to get a better look because everyone was weirded out by it, and it was basically something they've never seen before. After a while it ran off to disappear. Jay could have made this up, but like I said, why would she? And she's never seen anything like it. So anyway, I get freaked out because here I am knowing about this freaking skinwalker, and my friend is literally clueless, thinking it's just a regular weird animal and she's just had a weird experience. Oh god. I ask her, do you even know what skinwalkers are? She just looked at me and said, what's that? I googled it and showed her the deceptions of skinwalkers, and she said, that's what I saw, but it had the head of a deer. She kept on saying it didn't look human or like an animal. After a while too, the kid from that bus stop didn't come back. Although that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this, I just thought it was weird. So we were freaking out together, because what she said reminded me about what I heard at night, about it not being animal or human. See, a couple of years back before she told me the story, I found myself one night sitting in my backyard like really early, maybe 3 in the morning or so, because I was thinking about things due to personal reasons. And I'm kind of just chilling and enjoying the silence when all of a sudden I hear this really freaky echoing scream from far away. The only way I can describe it as though that a woman and a cat were trapped together inside of a bag, screaming like they're getting murdered. I know mountain lions, foxes and owls are a thing, and they make the weirdest calls, but I looked up that stuff and it's just not the same. Like usually, you wouldn't be able to tell if it's an animal, right? It's just common sense, like my friend said. But that don't sound like animal or human. It sounded really unnatural and weird. Now me being me, I was really upset at first. Now the thing was really far away, and I actually thought that they might even be killing someone in the streets at 3 AM. That thing travelled so fast though. It sounded freaky as hell, and it was getting closer as it got to the more weird and unnatural sound. It only took me a couple of seconds to realise that this isn't a woman and this ain't a cat. Because while this was going down, I was going through it in my head like, what the hell is that thing? The first thing went from sounding like a good couple of miles away to being in my goddamn neighbourhood in 5 seconds. It was so weird because 1 second it sounded far away, and the next, it's on my street. I had a heart attack. The second I stood up, the scream just stopped, just like it started. And I'm really thinking at this point that it must be in front of my house. I walk as calmly as possible back inside, locking the doors. And the scream was back again, far away. I also heard some scraping and tapping sounds on my windows, but it happens at the same time now. I'd say 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning, and seeing some black figures that aren't really affected by light outside of my house. To add detail to those things so you can get a feel for it, basically what happened is that I was doing a project for class, and since I procrastinate like I'm a pro up until 2 AM, I go to wash my hands from all the graphite, and the water's running while I hear a scraping sound against one of the bedroom doors that leads to my backyard. Now most of the door is made up of these glass panes, the kind that make everything appear distorted and like blobby ash lumps. But then I see something pointy, dark against the window, almost looking ghost-like. I turn off the water and wait a bit, and it comes back and scrapes against the window again. I'm not trying to freak out, but my hands are shaking. It's stupid, but I actually whisper, "What are you doing?" while my voice trembled, and it stopped. I stop, and I don't hear anything except for what sounded like somebody walking by the window to the house every now and then. It continued that way for some nights too. Off and on, I would be hearing footsteps by my window, and even a tap on the window. Sometimes I ignored them, and other times I look out to see who's there, but I never see anyone. Another night I'd been outside in my backyard again, after having a rough day. It was maybe 3 or so AM in the morning. I'm sitting outside on the trampoline relaxing. I suddenly notice it's quiet, like kind of uneasy silence that feels like a vacuum. I get this feeling of dread like I'm being watched, and I snap my head to the left and catch a glimpse of a humanoid dark figure under the side of my fence immediately. I'm a little freaked out because I notice that this thing is pure black. The streetlight hits it, but didn't do anything at all. It almost looked cartoony, if that makes any sense, cause it's like the laws of physics don't apply to this thing. See, the reason I'm ranting about this is that I told both my friends my own story in psychology class at the same time. A lot of kids there live around my area, I mean like 5 to 15 max away, and they all start screaming, and the entire class went crazy when I finished because apparently they've all experienced the exact same thing as me. One girl told me about also hearing the tapping on her window at night. Another one told me about a really dark figure that seemed to follow her at night time, also screaming from the woods. Pretty much everyone's heard the screaming. It sounded the same, but that's the thing. In completely different time frames. That's the weird part because everyone's voice sounds different. So how could she describe the same thing I did? You know, like, if people were really killing each other out there. none of us thought it was an animal either. We all agreed from that point our town is pretty haunted, but I don't know. I mean, if there's any animal that sounded like that, I want to know, because that didn't sound like anything I've ever heard before. I want to be enlightened, I want it to be something normal, but I just don't think it can be. The only person I heard of who's seen anything remotely specific is my friend's best friend from art school, who went on the bus, and apparently, like, it's really bad to talk about skinwalkers, and even worse, if you see them, it's like bad mojo. These things are said to be able to travel very quickly, so thinking about that made it seem like we experienced a skinwalker. Okay, so I had this saved in my notes for a while, but today I just asked my co-worker, who was also my friend in high school who lives nearby. He got all spooked and said that he's heard and seen the same things, but he's very spiritual and often has visions. He told me that he believes they're doing dark magic in the woods because of a dream he had about some hooded up group sacrificing a woman and a cat. Which is freaky because it also turns out that behind our local dog park, there's a patch of woods with dodgy stuff going down there. I was shown this by an acquaintance during my freshman year who lives a couple of streets away. Down the path in the woods, after some time of walking, there's this huge cross smack bang in the middle of nowhere. It's basically raw, some crooked old nails struck together with a rope hanging from where you'd put your hands to be crucified. It's huge too, and whenever I decide to check it out, I have this horrible feeling like I don't want to be there or something bad's gonna happen. Anyway, he says I'm not the first person that he knows has told him about experiencing these things. He's also had his experience while there with humanoid figures. He says that he saw one turn around and look at him, directly in the eyes as though it was trying to intimidate him before vanishing. So we basically don't mess with anything in the woods near me. My father died about 5 years ago, unexpectedly from a heart attack. To say it was hard on my mother would be an understatement. Our old house in Knoxville just didn't feel the same anymore, and about a year later, my mum and I made plans to take ourselves and an elderly dog, Ace, to move further south to a small town situated about half an hour from Atlanta. Just a few days before we slated to move, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've ever come to experience. All that was within my dream was my bedroom, a picture-perfect recreation of the real thing. I sometimes wonder if it was a sleep paralysis. To further add to the dream's realism, in the middle of the night, the street lights come on across the street that illuminate my window, creating a reflection on the wall perpendicular. In my dream, as I lay there, staring at the exact reflection on the wall, I saw an orb of smoke fading from the shadows. Goosebumps chill across my skin as I lay there panicked, afraid to move a muscle. Suddenly it stopped moving and steadily hung in the light's reflection as though staring at me. Without a warning, it spoke to me in my dad's voice. "I'm sending something to watch you." Despite hearing my father's voice from the orb, I'm terrified, and I don't know why. "What?" I whisper. The orb remains silent, leaving an eerily dead silence in the voice. "Damn, black." I woke up almost instantaneously. I'm gasping for breath now. The nightmare had chilled me to my core. I didn't know exactly what to make of it, especially the final words. I chalked it up to my dad wishing well on us maybe, but I couldn't shake the feeling. With the next couple of weeks, my mum and I moved out of Knoxville and headed down to South Georgia. She had managed to find a quaint little house for us. It had only 1 or 2 neighbours down there, and it's down the middle of a long gravel road in the middle of the woods. Nice for us. Probably the best reliever of all my stresses came with the move, however, was our neighbour's cat. She was a petite, older black cat that gravitated towards me almost instantly, and I treated her as though she's my own. I left out a can of food once or twice a week for her. Even if I didn't call out for her, when she saw me outside, she'd run up to me, helping ease my tensions. Less than a month into our new house, I suddenly awoken to a faint coughing that sounded like it is coming from downstairs. The important thing to know about our dog is that he has a collapsed trachea. He needs medicine to calm the condition down. So I'm used to walking up in the middle of the night to get his medicine. I proceed downstairs from my bedroom to give him his cough medicine, but I couldn't find him anywhere through the house. He wasn't in his bed sleeping, and he wasn't in the kitchen. I mean, literally nowhere to be found. I didn't check my mum's room, however, as I didn't want to wake her up. Besides, I wouldn't have heard the coughing if he had been in there anyway, so I just let it be. That's when I heard the coughing again, but it was coming from further away. It's outside now. I look over to the side door patio leading to the woodlands, and realised I'd forgotten to shut it. There it stood, slightly ajar. He got out. I immediately ran outside with a flashlight and started calling out for my dog. Ace! Ace! I shouted out into the neighbouring woods. I heard another cough and shined my light in its direction. That time, it had echoed from down the gravel road. I swear, a path had never looked so terrifyingly desolate before in my life. I stared down that long gravel road that led us to our new home, but in that moment, I thought my dog was lost, and chalk it up to the new house jitters. I go, Ace, come on, pressing on. But then I heard it, the cough I'd been following, almost right beside me, but this time, it didn't stay a dry cough like it had been before. Instead, it slowly descended into a low growl. I shined my light towards the sound. There stood a bright red fox in the middle of the path. For a moment, I figure it's the fox that I'd mistaken for my dog. The whole time, as I was processing what I was seeing, it stared directly at me, its eyes glowing. However, our stare was broke when it tilted its head to the right, looking down, and there was our neighbour's little black cat staring beside me. However, it had completely changed its persona, no longer happy, affectionate, not the cat I knew. Instead, it arched its back upright, every fibre of her hair standing uneasily, uttering the lowest growl I've ever heard from a feline. In that moment, I figured she's just scared of the fox, so I knelt down beside her in a bid to coax her away and avoid fox hunting her. But no matter how many times I tried to coax her out of fight mode, she wouldn't. That's when I looked towards the direction of the fox once more, but there wasn't a fox anymore. Instead, in the exact same spot of the gravel road, was a walking, rotten corpse of a coyote roadkill, slowly moving towards me. It took a step back. I'm absolutely mortified of what I'm seeing. Its jaws hanging loose, eyes are bloodstained, wobbling now. I rub my eyes in disbelief, hoping I'm imagining it. But it was there, and it was real. And despite what was in front of us, the black cat just kept on growling at me. Suddenly, it stopped. The creature had ceased its walk towards me. For a moment, it just stood there, glancing back and forth between myself and this little black cat that was trying to defend me. I now realise. That's when I mistakenly heard this beast mutter 2 words almost. Damn black. In a flash, the creature ran straight into the woods. I shine my flashlight in its direction, but it's completely vanished. Even the brush it came from looked untouched. That's when the cat standing behind me calmed herself down. Almost as though nothing happened, she rubbed herself against my leg, returning to normal, now in a very loving state and manner. Despite technically not being mine, I scoop her up and run back inside the house and upstairs with the little black cat snuggled up in my arms. I decide to poke my head into my mum's room. Lying on the floor, sound asleep, is Ace, who had been here the whole time. I quietly close her door before bolting upstairs, making sure the little cat slept with me that night. From the research I've done, I am almost certain that I was a victim of a skinwalker. Okay, I posted a skinwalker encounter yesterday. I found it helped me, getting it off my chest and out into the open. Now this story goes into some of the details about injuries. The details are not too bad in my opinion, but you've had your warning. Now for some background, I was 16, around 2016 when this happened. I live in Massachusetts, which is where this happened. The day starts normally. I went to school, had a test in vet tech, and I took the bus home. Both my parents were at work like normal, but after 3 hours when my mum should have been home, I got worried. Around 5 PM, I got a phone call from my dad who told me that my mum's in a car accident and they're both in the hospital and they're gonna be there for a while. It got very late, almost 10, and my parents weren't home, so I decided to put my younger brothers to bed. I stayed up waiting for my parents to get home. I spent my time reading and writing an essay for school until around 1 in the morning. I got a call from my dad who said that he wasn't coming home. He was staying in a motel that was closer to the hospital. I just got off the phone and finished that part of the essay that I was on. I gather my stuff and walk through the kitchen, heading towards the stairs that leads upstairs when a terrifying loud moaning screeches through my ears. The moaning came from outside. I mean, it's super loud, but would stop occasionally. Like whatever it was had a voice crack, almost sounding pained. I turn on the outside light to see an ugly sight. Sitting in the yard just feet from my house is a coyote, horribly injured. Its head's caved in, its paws bleeding. This was evident by the pool of blood. It appeared that it had a long, deep gash all down its back. I reach in my pocket going for my phone, only to realise I left it on the table I'd been working on. Oh God. I turn and rush back to the table. I was planning on calling a local vet clinic that I knew was open 24/7. When I reached the table, the moaning got much louder and more pained. Then it stopped. I grabbed my phone and ran back to the window. At first I was confused as hell. The coyote's gone. replaced by a common tabby cat. It was odd. The cat was sitting in exactly the same place that the coyote was sitting in. Weird. After the initial shock, I noticed that the tabby cat had the exact same injuries. Same part of the head caved in, same bleeding and gashes. Now I couldn't pinpoint the difference for a good few minutes, but then I realised that on the right shoulder blade it is exactly the same. I dropped my phone. As soon as my phone hit the floor, the cat starts meowing loudly. I'm now stuck here terrified as it meows at me. It's not even blinking. After a good 10 minutes, I slowly pick up my phone off the floor. I straighten back up and look out the window, and the cat's gone. It had only gone for a few seconds, and in that short time, it vanished. Some unknowing feeling come over me. I don't know what it was. Worry for the animal? Curiosity? Maybe. Hell, it might have been something that the animal made me feel. I have no clue. Now outside, I first walked to the blood puddle and looked for a trail of blood, and I found it. I started to follow the trail and found that it ended as soon as it got past the gates. To make sure that I just couldn't see it in the dark, I pulled out my phone and illuminated the ground. I looked for 5 minutes and don't find anything. Like the cat and trail had vanished. I called the veterinary clinic and they sent out a car. They look around for things, but they can't find anything. At the time I didn't think anything of this, but thereafter I realised there's no trail of blood leading to my house. I have no idea what this thing was. None of my searches have come up with anything. I'm honestly completely dumbfounded as to what this creature was. I only hope it wasn't a skinwalker attacking these. My wife and I were driving through the northern part of Arizona on Highway 89 between Flagstaff and Page. It's about 1 AM, as we're on the third shift at the time and often drove at night to avoid traffic. I saw a few set of eyes glowing in my headlights a little ways up the road, so I let off the gas, slowing down to avoid hitting an animal in the road. When we drove by, we see several dogs or coyotes on the side of the road, and I hit the gas and drove by. After we passed, my wife said, "One of them was running next to my car," and I looked over and saw it, probably 20 feet off the shoulder of the road. I floored it, and I see that it stood up on its own hind legs and kept pace with us for a couple of seconds before turning away from the road and disappearing. The whole event probably lasted no more than 15 seconds, but God, it is the most terrifying 15 seconds of my life. This was probably 20 years ago, and we still rarely talk about it. We live in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her 2 brothers were home alone while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they don't have electricity, and like many people there, they've been outside in the dark for about an hour, and my aunts and uncles are getting ready for bed. Outside, they hear noises, as though someone is moving things around them. My oldest uncle then went outside to see what's going on, and he saw a figure outside the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary because the closest neighbour is miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through personal items. My uncles and aunts were frightened by the sight and knew they must take action. They took out the rifle and steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door, aiming the gun at the figure in the dark. They're shaken at this point. The figure then turned and starts towards them. Totally unfazed by the weapon, my uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happens. The figure drew closer and my aunt began to smell something like a rotten corpse. It's so strong she began to gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger, no luck. The figure came closer and closer, but now, off in the distance, headlights are approaching. My grandparents are returning. The figure looks towards the lights and starts to move away and tucks itself behind a tree near the home. My oldest uncle ran towards a truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car and my uncle pointed to the tree. That thing was poking out its head to observe what they're doing. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove, grabbing a handful of ashes and rubbing it over the gun, and placed an ash-covered bullet to the chamber. He walked out onto the porch and fired towards a tree. Whatever that thing was did not expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed, and the figure began running. My grandpa chased my aunt inside and my uncles and grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so as my grandfather and uncles chased after the figure, the truck was bouncing and the headlights were not fixed on one particular spot. My uncle swears that whenever the headlights would hit, the figure he saw a woman. Not only that, whatever it was running on its fours like a bear. My grandfather must stop now as they're nearing a ditch with a 30 feet drop. He got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared and he knew it was her to leave the family alone. After a few days, there was the news that the woman that my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you know who the Skinwalker is, say their name and it will kill them. Out on the Navajo reservation, we don't have the city come and collect our trash, so we have to burn the trash out in these huge burning barrels. Not very eco-friendly, I know, but it's what we have to do. Now if you don't light the trash properly, the fire will go out and the trash will sit in the barrel. This is important because we are told to dispose of personal hygiene items. If you removed all your hair from your brush, make sure the trash burned. If it was that time, you had to make sure everything was burned. They tell us things because skinwalkers have been known to dig through trash in order to find out things they can use against us. They use the things that were briefly connected to bring misfortune onto others. Some of my family members take part in the sport of rodeo, so to practice, they have a dummy rope and throw it at things and try to bring them in. My two male cousins were enjoying themselves outside, taking turns swinging the rope at the fake calf. The elders are always adamant that we shouldn't stay out past sundown, where that it's pitch black for miles. But my cousins aren't superstitious and are under streetlight. My cousins are joking and laughing, having a great time. That changes when the oldest cousin looks over to a burn barrel. A dark figure is bent over, rummaging through the garbage that's failed to burn. My cousins devise a plan that they're gonna grab weapons and chase it. They move strategically so that they are able to flank the figure. they run full speed at it and begin yelling and swinging. My cousin states that they kept this up for the most part, until the figure ran under the streetlight. But that's when my cousins see that what they thought was actually a person is actually a goat. Why would they think it is a person? The goat was running on its hind legs. Fear runs through their bodies as the figure runs off into the darkness. Now feeling nervous, and not entirely accepting what they've just seen, they began roping the dummy again. There's an awkward silence amongst the boys who just saw something unnatural, but talking about it now would just make it seem real. The boys roped in silence until one of them looked over to a tree. There's a head peeking out at them. If they didn't pay attention to it, whatever it was would poke its head out from the tree to stare. When they would look in the direction of the tree, it would move quickly out of sight. This was the final straw. My cousins ran back into the house. They told their parents and my uncle come out. It was still there, poking its head from behind a tree. My uncle loaded up his gun and starts walking towards the tree line. He aimed it and pulled the trigger. Gun jammed. Whatever it was began to run so fast it appeared to be a blur. When it left, my uncle came in and gave the boys a thorough lecture about staying out late. One of my cousins then told my uncle that whatever it was had been digging through the trash barrel. They went to investigate the creature that hauled a lot of things out of the barrel, which was odd. There were tracks all around the area. They followed the tracks, but they suddenly vanish, dead in the middle of nowhere, with no possible way they could have went. The Navajo Reservation is the largest reservation in the United States. It goes into New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona. This story takes place in the northeast region of Arizona, near Indian Wells. This was told by people from around that area. If you're heading west on State Highway 15, out towards Stilton, you come to a stretch of road that goes into a small valley. I remember going down this road in my youth. If you ever looked at the horizon, it would seem as if the road kept going. Then suddenly your car would be pulled down by gravity as though being followed by the road. It would always give me butterflies when we would get to the drop. When I heard about this story, it made my stomach feel different. A man was driving home one night and it's very late. It was a drive that he had done before, so he wasn't bothered by it. When you're driving on the reservation, sometimes there isn't any way to keep cattle from getting on the road. No fences means that you need to be extra aware. I always get told to look out for black horses. If you see a black horse, then you'll be able to see anything else that may wander into the path of your vehicle. So this man is driving home, not really paying much attention. He drives down the slope, but when he gets to the bottom of the valley, he sees it. He doesn't have time to react. Suddenly, a horse comes out of the darkness. He slams his brakes but can't stop. The impact is enough to deploy the airbags. The man is tossed around a bit. He turns on the emergency lights and gets out of the car to assess damage. The front of the car is crumpled and one of the headlights is destroyed. He cursed out loud. This was the worst place to have an accident. He didn't have signal for help. Then he thinks of the horse. This man went into his cab and got a small keychain flashlight. He starts shining around looking for the animal. He heard noises, but they don't sound like a horse. But he was absolutely positive that he hit a horse. As he approaches the sounds, he could see the animal's fur moving from its ragged breathing. As he got closer, he began to realize what it was. An elderly woman wrapped in a large spelt. She was moaning from pain. The man stopped dead in his tracks due to fear. He stumbled back to his truck. Although it suffered plenty of damage, he was able to drive off. Once he got signal again, he called the authorities. An ambulance drove out there and recovered her. She's then driven to the local care facility. Due to the fact that many of the healthcare staff were Navajo, no one wanted to touch the woman. The woman known in the community was thought to be bedridden. This was shocking because she was so far from home, and the state she was in was off-putting. She had on her attire when she arrived. The nurses called her family to come in. When she got there, they removed her jewelry. When her family got there, they were frightened. But there was some non-Navajo staff in there that provided care. She only had bumps and scrapes, which didn't make any sense at all. She's able to get up and walk around the same evening. She went home with her family that night, but apparently vanished after a few days. In Navajo culture, if you find out who a Skinwalker is, you have the power to destroy them. After the community around India Wells found out, or more fittingly who she was, it was certain that her end come. I had pet rabbits as a kid. They lived outside in a cage, a really big cage inside like a bigger shed, so they had a pretty good life. But I went out with my older sister to feed them. At the time we were about 5 or 7. On the way out to the cage, we both saw what appeared to be a really tall man running inhumanly fast through our backyard. We live in what is basically a swamp, and had to have cleared this giant downed tree and run over mud and ferns. But regardless, he seems to be going through at least 20 miles per hour. We both dropped what we had and bolt inside. At the time our parents are able to convince us it's a deer. We wanted to believe them, but it just wasn't. I convinced myself for over a decade that that's what we saw. Fast forward to a few years ago, I was at a park near my house with my friend late at night. I pulled into the dirt road drive in my Outback and parked facing the old practice fence. Now we go to the field that was too foggy to see across, except for a split second. We can see what appeared to be a very tall man running across the field. We drove as fast as that Subaru could take us out that park. Now a couple of years ago, I was at the same park under similar circumstances. This time, it was clear but very windy. Now from across the field and into a field, we heard a crash and a scream. Not a crash then a scream, but simultaneous. It was the most shrill, terrifying, god-awful screech I've ever heard. More human than a fisher cat, but far louder and more sinister. Again, we noped it out of there as quick as possible. So for context, I live in southern Maryland on a large plot of land. We have 3 large farm dogs, 2 of whom are German Shepherds. They're very used to the various animals that pursue our property, and very rarely get spooked or upset. We also have lots of livestock, and it's uncommon for us to lose a random animal or find a pile of chicken feathers in the corner of our property. However, we've always been able to explain it or add extra protection for our flocks. Around 8 months ago, we started losing chickens at an alarming rate. They would disappear. Even our shepherds couldn't send them anywhere on the property. For a while, we figured it's just a barred owl or some other bird of prey. The main problem with that theory is that literally 10 would disappear at a time rather than the normal 1 or 2. We decided to put a trail cam up to watch our most eastern flock. Almost immediately, the problem stopped, so we took them down. But then it got stranger. I've always gotten sleep paralysis, and it's like to believe I'm pretty comfortable with my sleep paralysis demon. It's never really been something to concern me. However, around the same time as we started losing chickens, I would see something different in my sleep paralysis. Whereas my demon would chill in the corner and not move, this thing would hang around and move back and forth, almost like a sloth. It had long fingers and was really skinny, like, weirdly. It didn't appear human. I then noticed it constantly stared at me, whatever part of the room I was in. At the time, I decided not to worry though, and figure it's just anxiety. Which brings us up to September 2018. One night at around 2, I woke up completely able to move my body. Everything seemed normal. No one else was sleeping in the house that night, but that's pretty standard around that time of year. I glanced up at my rafters and saw the long-fingered thing moving and looking at me. Immediately I turn on my bed lamp. It's gone, yet again. I talk it up to stress and decide to go downstairs to grab a cup of water. All of our dogs are happily asleep, and I went back to bed turning off the light. The second it was dark, I could see it again, without my eyes having to adjust. This freaked me out enough, but all of a sudden I heard a Rottweiler get up and start growling. He barks and growls. I call out, but he kept going. He got louder and louder until the other dogs joined in. Now, I turned the light back on, grabbing my hunting rifle. I went downstairs and took 2 of the dogs outside, and I swear to God, I've never heard a silent night like it. I moved my flashlight slowly around the perimeter looking for the shine of eyes, or anything. All of a sudden, the chickens are going haywire. Like so loud they distract the dogs, who sprinted out towards them. I followed them only to find no chickens, and our fence is torn down. There's no animals in the area that could even try to do that, so we quickly get inside and camped out for the evening. It was quiet after that, and when the morning came, the chickens are safely back home. I stupidly figured the problem solved and decided not to worry about it. The only thing was that I started seeing the long-fingered rafter thing every time I turned out the lights. Eventually I get so freaked out, I decide to call a shaman. She told us that we have a Wendigo problem, that she would come and sage the house. We opened every single window and door, letting her do her thing, but since then, we've had no problems. The issue now is that when we walk our dogs at night, or put the chickens inside, I swear someone's watching me. I've had a couple of other people bring up that they feel weird at night, and nobody goes outside alone anymore. Whenever we walk our dogs at night, they get so paranoid and don't want to move, especially not towards the forest. The creepiest part though is sometimes at night, we hear screaming. We assume it's often coyotes, but every once in a while, it's just off enough that we get scared. A couple of times it's been a lone shriek, which is very uncommon for foxes or coyotes, and a few nights ago, we were asleep in bed when we heard a scream from directly outside our window. My partner says that he's worried that someone was hurt, so he opened our window and yells, "Is anyone out there?" And we hear a lot of shuffling, like somebody scrambling off. It sounded heavier than a bird of prey, but way lighter than a person. Our dog stopped barking, and within a minute, we hear another scream a good mile away. I was DJing at a wedding in a little village about 100 kilometers from my city. I packed up everything once things were going down and was the last one out of there at 3 AM. I start to drive down the highway and see a big orange glow emanating from the other side of a ridge on the other side of railway tracks. I decided to check it out as it was even and smooth. I've never seen a light like it before. Was thinking it might be some huge bonfire for the wedding's after party. I had to drive up 1 or 2 kilometers to cross the tracks and the crest for the ridge, and once I did, the light was still off on the horizon. I drove towards it for a few kilometers, but it didn't seem to be getting any nearer. I decided it wasn't a bonfire, and that I didn't want to get myself into trouble, so I turned around, heading back to the city. 50 kilometers later, I get to the main highway, so I decide to look back, and the light was just as big in the sky as it had been in the village. I looked back at the news the next day and found out what happened. A few underground gas station storage tanks had ruptured and combusted, which causes an absolutely massive fire, and there's no option but to let it burn out. It ended up burning for days.
This happened last Friday, and I'm still stumped. For reference, I am a male in my late 20s, and I live with my girlfriend, who is currently away on business. I work for a large financial institution in the UK, and often work till very late, as I hate bringing home work. For some background info, we bought our current house a few weeks ago, and during the moving process, I was away with work, leaving it down to my partner and a few friends. My car has also recently had a complete electronics failure, so we were down to just using her car. The house itself is located in a small gated community off a country road on the outskirts of an upmarket town in the UK. It's surrounded by woodlands, and if you didn't live there or know someone who does, chances are you wouldn't have heard of it or even knew it existed. In total, there are 8 houses in the community, and the main gate gives access to the first 6. Where my house is located, and then there's houses in the community. In total, there are 8 houses in the community, and the main gate gives access to the first 6, where my house is located, and then there's a further 2 gates on the top of the road, which lead to 2 very large mansion-style houses. The houses which haven't got individual gates are about 100 feet away from each other and have an enclosed rear garden, and the neighbours are all business types, who are very often in work and keep themselves to themselves. Anyway, about 2 days after leaving for my business trip, I get a call from my girlfriend who seems shaken and tells me that there's a man standing in the garden, and that she can't see his face but he's walking around and crouching in the tree line. So concerned but not 100% convinced, as she does have a vivid imagination and it's the first time she's been home alone in our new house, I tell her to lock the doors, go to bed and call the police if she sees him again. I return to our city's train station on Tuesday and agree with my girlfriend that she'll pick me up in her car. Then I'll take it home as she schedules to go to Manchester for a conference. I meet up with her, grab a coffee, see her off to her train, then drive her car back to our house. The time is roughly 9 PM. I park the car on the driveway, head inside, shower, watch some reruns of King of the Hill, then head to bed. Then get woken up by a light shone into the bedroom window from downstairs. I get up to investigate, crouching to avoid being seen, and head into the study next to our bedroom and open the curtains to cover some French doors that lead to the small balcony. My heart drops when I see the man has now moved towards our back door and is trying the door handle. The house is in an L shape, so although I can't see him, he can't see me without moving around from the back door. He stops for a while, begins flashing the light on and off back into the woods, before walking calmly back into them. I call the police and make a report. Nothing happens on Wednesday, but on Thursday, when I'm giving our cat a bath, she just thinks she needs them. I hear the garage door being messed with. I'm in the bathroom directly behind the garage, so I move into the kitchen to get a knife, before heading to the garage to check what's going on, when the noises stop, and I hear running down the driveway and away from the house. I call the police and they send an officer around to check the property. All they find is some knife marks and scuffs on the bottom of the garage. On Friday, I get my car delivered from the dealership and decide to work from home. I also park my car in the garage, leave my girlfriend on the drive. At around 11 PM, I'm in the upstairs study, listening to music and working, when I find myself freezing. I thought I was going to stop breathing as I felt someone watching me, and turning to face the French doors, I see a man, nondescript looking, around 35, wearing a coat and gloves, carrying what looked like a torch, standing on my balcony. Our eyes met. Now filled with rage, I go for one of my golf clubs from my golf bag and charge towards the door. He climbs down off the balcony and runs into the woods. I've never seen this man in my life before, but I am sure it's the man that's been causing problems in my life recently. It's also dawned on me that he would have only seen my girlfriend before, and only seen her car. Maybe he thought she lived alone. I've notified the police and have brought some more security devices to install on the property as well, and I've also parked my car on the drive of hers. We don't know who he is or why he's doing this, but we're hoping it won't happen again. This took place a couple of years ago when I was still dating my ex. Him and his dad had adopted a Rottweiler German Shepherd mix from a shelter. The dog was really aggressive towards strangers and other animals. It took a couple of months for him to warm up to me, but eventually we bonded, and I would occasionally be cuddled up on the couch with him and take a nap. It got to the point where he would push people aside so all 88 pounds of him could be with me on the couch instead of someone else sitting next to me. During the summer, my ex and me were house sitting for his dad who was on vacation with his girlfriend. My ex would usually be home to walk the dog. He was way too strong for me, but this time he was at work and I had to walk the dog. We had ordered a special harness for him beforehand, hoping it would make him pull less. My ex and his dad didn't live in the safest of neighbourhoods, and it was getting dark out while I went into the woods to go on our walk. I let the dog run around by himself, but kept his harness on. Since he was a very aggressive dog towards other people and other dogs, I'd like to keep it on so I could call him as soon as I saw someone else and get him on his leash again. For this reason, I was kind of on edge and looking around me all the time. We weren't walking for too long when I saw a group of guys coming up in front of me. They had their hoods on and kept their heads low while clearly whispering to each other and nodded their heads towards me. I looked behind me and another group of guys was approaching me from that side. I realised it was dark out. I was a 16-year-old girl walking by myself in the woods. The dog was running off somewhere and couldn't be seen in the dark, but I had his leash in my pocket. The guys hadn't noticed I had him with me. I quickly called him to my side, and I heard his paws loudly coming towards me while he was growling. He pushed himself against my leg and loudly started growling at the guys. I told him just to keep walking or I'd command the dog to attack. Believe me, this wasn't a small dog and he growled like a bear. Luckily, the guys quickly walked in another direction and I took the fastest route home again. It took me a while of cuddling on the couch to get calm again, but I'm so grateful the dog listened as well. He was very protective of me and he noticed me being scared. My ex and me broke up years ago and I have no idea if my saviour dog is doing well, but thanks for protecting me that day. I don't know what could have happened if you weren't there.
I was up in the middle of nowhere, on some mountains in rural Ireland, and I come across hundreds and hundreds of bones from different animals. It doesn't make sense why it's up so high. It is obviously normal to see a skeleton in the wilderness, but this huge pile of bones is odd. Some were from sheep, others from cats and dogs, and some really look like they're from humans. It's weird because we don't have any predatory animals in Ireland. The only thing that could have gathered it would have been a person.
Forgive me if the way I write about this seems light-hearted. I'd like to say it's a way that I cope with it, and it's just the kind of person I am. Also, forgive me if this is really long. Now, I'd like to start off this day by saying that most consider me an intimidating person by nature. My close friends don't really believe that, but they know that I most definitely do not mess around when it comes to certain situations, whether it's telling someone to go away, as much as I hate to admit it, getting physical with someone. I've never really had someone approach me in public thinking of getting the best of me, if that makes sense. About half a year ago, I was at my then house rolling some small joints with my girlfriend. I live somewhat in the middle of nowhere, and there are a lot of trees in my area, and they're also in my backyard. I wouldn't classify it a massive forest, but it's not small enough to simply be a grove. There's wildlife there though. My girlfriend and I hadn't smoked much that day, and we were home alone, and seeing as we could do anything we wanted, we decided, yeah, let's smoke while taking a bit of a nature walk. It seemed like an amazing idea at the time. My girlfriend sat next to me while I rolled it up. We were talking about random stuff and listening to heavy metal as I focused on rolling those sweet spliffs. Kinda mention, those joints were absolute pells. Anyway, I had finished rolling and we decided to finally leave my house and walk into the plain woods, which at the time had never been intimidating to me or anyone I'd been in there with, unless they were just really scared by nature or had some anxiety issues. I have the joints in my back pocket and we leave. We're walking through my backyard towards one of many trails from my place. I should also mention it was summer, so it was only 7 PM and it wouldn't be getting dark for maybe 2, 3 or 4 hours. We light up for about an hour or so, it's fine. We just talk and kiss a little bit. Basic stuff really. We're on the second joint, just walking along the path, and we see this massive flat rock, like a pancake boulder. We're like, hell yeah, and we sit on it and lay down. The two of us just sit there for a while, holding hands, and passing the joint between us. Maybe 30 minutes pass, and we start hearing noises. I'd like to mention by this point, the sun will start to set soon, maybe another 30 minutes. We're obviously really freaked out by the sounds. At the time, we just looked at each other, and internally blamed it on the weed making us a little paranoid. There was wildlife in this forest, as I mentioned. We were trespassing in their backyard, so why would we mind a cute bunny? After a while of silence, we hear that noise we both know damn well isn't an animal. Now that I think about it, it sounded like someone running something sharp against a solid but jagged surface, like a rock. It was pretty far away, but somehow it was loud enough that we heard it. It was faint though. We look at each other and immediately sit up. We don't see anything. I stand up and urge her to do so as well. This most definitely wasn't the forest fairies. We stand up for a minute or so, and then we hear a big snap, like a tree branch getting stepped on with a ton of force, and then fast footsteps, like some dude is sprinting. I freak out and go into panic mode, as I'm worried to admit. And of course, we were deep into these woods, and I urge my girlfriend to run as fast as she can towards my house. Now, Kimber and I aren't necessarily sporty people. We were more of the academic bunch our whole lives. We weren't completely out of shape, but looking back on it, it would have been a hell of a lot easier if we did cross country or something. Kimber runs in front of me, and is a little farther ahead. We are on trails at this point, and the twigs and leaves are completely shredding our faces, neck, legs and arms. We hear this person who's running, obviously running after us, start hooting and hollering, like some damn creep or something. This makes us really scared, and obviously we run faster. We're sprinting, huffing and puffing like a fat kid. This person is unfortunately closer at this point, and I look back and I see him. He's an older guy, maybe 40 years old, give or take. His hair is long and really thin, and he's scraggly looking. This makes me pure cement, of course. I yell at Kimber to hurry up and she does. I look behind me again and he's somehow gaining on us. Kimber makes a turn and I recognise it being the straight to my house. The turn was abrupt and I thank Jesus because this guy must have been too close to process the turn. We turn and see the lights of my house in the darkness. Seeing this beacon of hope makes us run harder. The guy can't be seen and we make it into my cleared backyard. My girlfriend runs up my back porch, steps and rips the sliding door open, letting me in and locking it. She slams the blinds down to cover the door and we make sure all the doors and windows are locked. I fill my back pocket for my phone and realise of course it's in those trees. My girlfriend's phone is dead. No house phone because who has one of those these days? It was a burden at the time though. My girlfriend starts having a panic attack and anxiety attack. I'm not sure which one of those it was. I plug her phone in and it starts charging. I turn all the lights off except for those by our doors. I saw no sign of the man for the rest of that night, and for the rest of the time I lived there. Her phone charged and we called the cops, and they surveyed the area, but found nothing. It was terrifying for me, and I can only assume it was worse for my girlfriend who has anxiety. I don't know what the man wanted that day, but it can't have been good.
A few years ago, my friend and I were staying in a hotel at a horse show we were competing in. We're probably 16 at the time, so her mum was staying with us too. I remembered it being a sketchy hotel. We even brought some sleeping bags and our own pillows because it wasn't clean. One night, my friend Megan and I went to the hot tub without her mum to unwind after a long day. When we got there, there's a man sitting in a chair by the pool, fully clothed. I didn't pay much attention to him, but it only occurred to me later how weird it was that there's a guy there with all his clothes on, when my friend and I are the only other people there. Almost immediately after Megan and I got there, he got up and left. Megan and I got in, and maybe 10 minutes later, these girls that look a little older than us come in. Megan and I don't think much of it, talking about our day, until one of the girls catches us and realises that we're talking about a horse show and says something like, "Cool, so you're staying at this hotel?" We said yes, that we're staying here for a 3-day event, and we just make small talk. At this point, Megan mentioned that we're there with her mum. There was nothing weird about what the girls said. It was just weird that they're talking to us since they were obviously older and we don't know them. Eventually though, they invited us back to their hotel room. Megan and I are understandably apprehensive and said we had to get up early to need bed. The girls were persistent, saying we could come and hang out and they're looking for some new friends, which seemed weird since, like I said, we're in a hotel in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. Not exactly the place you take a vacation with your friend to meet new people. They even said we could stay over with them, so we wouldn't have to go back to sleep with Megan's mum. Megan and I were insisting that we had a long day and we wanted to go and sleep, not hang out. But eventually we got up and left because they wouldn't stop talking about it. At the time, Megan and I decided not to tell her mum because we realised it's a weird situation and didn't want her mum to ban us from going to the hot tub alone. It wasn't until years later we realised that it could have been human trafficking because the man that was in the room alerted the girls of our presence to come back after us. It still makes my skin crawl.
Okay, so this happened last night, so I'm still pretty freaked out. To preface this, the other night I got followed as well, but only for about a block, and later ended up talking to those guys, and they were just messing with us, and ended up being super sweet. But there's another story for another subreddit, which helps to explain my mentality throughout the beginning of this whole experience. Also, the town I live in is usually regarded as one of the safest in the state, so I was being really naive, partly because of that fact. So, last night, two of my friends, a guy in the front seat and a girl in the back seat, and I, a girl, were driving around after seeing a movie and eating dinner. I was driving a family member's car because it was dark and one of my headlights was out. The car I usually drive brakes and turns like an old piece of crap, whereas this car, a newer, better model, brakes and turns like butter. It's so smooth. My friends and I get into a conversation about this and really wanted to test it out. We were right near my town's high school, so I pulled into a massive parking lot in the back, where I thought I could drive around and do some quick turns and stops without wrecking into anything. I pretty much thought we were alone, because in my mind, who hangs out at high school at 9:30 on a Sunday night? So I went in, did maybe 3 laps, and after about 5 minutes we left. No harm done. After we left, we noticed a car come out of the parking lot after us. I didn't see where they came from, but maybe they were just leaving too. So I kept driving without really thinking about it, but after a couple of turns and about 10 minutes, these guys were still behind us. So I kept driving for a while, trying really hard to get them off my ass. But they kept so close that even when I did use my signal, they could tell exactly what I was going to do before I even did it. I didn't want to call the police, because it hadn't been a complete wait period after getting my license yet, so I wasn't supposed to be driving any of my friends around, and I really didn't want to lose my license. At that point, I was still somewhat confident they were just messing with us, like the guys the night before, so I pulled into another, pretty empty parking lot, bad mistake, and waiting to see if they were going to get out. They pulled in like 25 feet away from me, in T-bone position, turned on their brights, and about 4 high school age guys got out. I made sure to keep my car in drive with a foot on the brake, just in case we needed to haul us out. Finally, one of them walked up and started knocking at my window and yelling, "Roll it down!" So instead of doing the smart thing of letting them get out of the car and then getting the hell out of there, I cracked my window. Learn how to effing drive. It's arseholes like you that get the cops called on the high school parking lot all the time. The guy who was aggressively knocking at the window shouted. "Okay, sorry," was all I could reply, trying to keep my tone. The guy who just talked to me stepped back a little, still shouting, but I was honestly too flustered to remember what, and one of his friends came a bit closer and yelled, "And you guys were effing frying stuff at our car." "God no, absolutely not, we would never," I explained, still trying to not sound upset or scared. Finally, all 4 guys backed up a little, and one from the back, who hadn't spoken yet, said, "Well, okay, but come back and we'll beat him up. He looks like a pussy anyway," looking at my friend. Then, after some silence and hesitation, they got back in the car and left. My friend and I just sat there for, I don't know how long, in just silence, until my friend in the back seat broke said silence, her voice shaking a little, with a sentence that perfectly summed up that entire encounter. What the hell? And with that, I took my foot off the brake and left the scene of what had just gone down. So, I don't want to see those aggressive parking lot boys again.
My boyfriend John and I went to hang out with his best friend called Mike and his current girlfriend. She knew about a party that's going on with some of her childhood friends who just finished their high school. So we arrived to the middle of nowhere. We see a bunch of people hanging out in front of yards of a few homes, drinking beer and just hanging out. It was very strange to me. We felt out of place. People were whispering about us and pointing at us. I assume because it's a small town where everyone knows each other, so the boys start mocking my boyfriend's shirt, a Lacoste polo, saying he's rich. Now my boyfriend was not rich, got a lot of hand-downs from his boss after he gained a few pounds, but we laugh it off. After a little bit, we're just standing around, and someone decided that we're going to a friend's house who had a pool. We all follow, thinking someone's actual home might be less strange than hanging out in front of random people's yards. Now we eventually arrive there, and there's some girls in the pool who are fully clothed. They seem nice enough. Some people are hanging outside of the driveway. I have a prosthetic leg, so I get tired if I stand up for too long. I sit on the back of the truck. After a while, a dude approaches us and sits down next to me. I was pretty naive at the time. Now, I grew up in a small town from a different state. The dude started telling us how he's from New York, questioning my life. Then he tries to touch me, saying I was cute or something. My boyfriend was there, so I felt safe enough not to react. I shrug off his comments and laugh at it, trying to act uninterested but frozen in fear. I had no idea where John's friend Mike was, much less his girlfriend, who actually might know these people. John is watching, waiting for me to say something, which I don't. I don't know why. I don't like the attention. The dude was not attractive, didn't seem fun or cool, just obviously a drunk creep. He starts getting more weird and I say, "Go away, I'm not interested, I have a boyfriend." He said, "Oh well, that's okay." He doesn't seem to mind, getting more strange. Then my boyfriend tells him to get off her. The guy says sorry and goes off to the woods. It's in front of the home. They eventually begin fighting. Now it was the homeowner. He had been passed out in his truck for the past 4 hours, but come in to see a complete stranger choking his friend. 3 guys run up on him. He managed to fight off 2 of them, but the host of the party has him in a headlock. He held him until he's almost unconscious. They fell to the ground with the host on top of him, pressing down on his throat, cutting off his ability to breathe. I try and whack him off but can't do anything. I look up and I can see that he's trying to kill my boyfriend. I then dig my prosthetic knee into his back. John's friends were nowhere to be seen. The party host had finally let off him, and we run to our car. Mike and his girlfriend are close behind, obviously aware of what's happening. We decide to call the cops. Now this is in a place called Rockdale Country, a backwoods nasty country town. I didn't realise how horrible it was until we're inside the sheriff's office. They claimed that the reports had gone missing, and nothing ever come of it.
I have this weird compulsion. Whenever I see a door, a window, or virtually any surface that I believe someone could hide behind, I imagine a face peering out at me, staring. I imagine what I could do. What could I do? You will soon find out why I have this phobia. On to the story. I will try my best to remember all the details, but my mind has repressed a lot of it. Around June of 2016, my mother and I were living in a small apartment. There was no basement or attic obviously, but there was one tiny crawl space in the closet floor of my bedroom. I never looked in it. I suppose some people would be overwhelmed with curiosity, but my mind had already imagined all the worst scenarios. I decided to leave whatever dead bodies and ghosts were down there for whoever rented after us. It was a nice apartment, small but perfect for the 2 of us. We lived there for a few peaceful months until the noises started. It was nothing extreme, just the odd bump in the night, and particularly scratching. My mum just brushed it off as rats in the walls, and as long as they stayed in there, I saw no reason to get rid of them. A week or 2 later, I had already grown used to the noise. It became almost comforting in a way. After all, I never really liked silence. That is, until I woke up one night to a different noise, a rolling sound, eerily similar to the sound my closet made when I opened it. I peeked my eyes open and looked over, but I couldn't make out anything in the dark. I thought maybe I saw something move, but I was well aware of how my mind played tricks on me in the dark. There was only one way to find out. I turned on my lamp. I feel like crying just writing this out. It's been almost a year since I've had to record this night. When I turned on the light, I expected to see the closet full of coats, but what I saw was much, much worse. It was an eye, not just an eye, but the entire half of someone's face, barely visible in the tiny crack he had opened. He didn't even react to being caught, no smile, no fear, just watching. My heart has never beat faster than that night. I wish I screamed, or maced him, or anything, but I just stared back, frozen in time until I couldn't hold it in anymore. I began sobbing, loudly. I think I tried to say something along the lines of, "What do you want?" But I was consumed in my crying. He opened the door more. I could now see his entire body, which I don't care to describe as I've spent 2 long years trying to forget that face. Shh. I lost my breath at that. Hearing him made it real. I couldn't pretend this was some weird dream or hallucination anymore. At this, I sat up and pressed my back against the wall. "It's okay, Redacted." He said it so cheerfully, it gave me chills just remembering it. This is when I finally had the courage to run out of the room. This creep knew my name. My effing name. My mum, still half asleep while she called the police, thought I'd just imagined it. Of course, by the time the police got there, he was already long gone. All that was left of him was that damned crawl space. I still never looked inside, though writing this now, I kinda wish I did. Having some sort of proof of this would, I don't know, comfort me I guess. Because at least you would all know that I'm not crazy. Apparently he had been living there, for how long I don't know, but the officers who arrived first on the scene said that there were tally marks inside the crawl space. I don't know how many. I didn't want to know whether he was marking the days or weeks. I just wanted to leave that apartment, and we did. The police never found him, not for certain. They thought they found a homeless man who matched the description, but he was apparently unresponsive. I've always thought they didn't take it all that seriously. They just thought he was a squatter. Even after I told them he knew my name, they thought that given how long he had seemingly been squatting, he had probably just heard my name through the floorboards. Since that night, he's been the face I always see when there's an open door or closet. It's grown more distorted as time goes on, but I can always make out a part of his pursed lips. As if he's still shushing me, even now. It's gotten easier with time, but I don't think it will ever leave me completely. Anyway, I guess we didn't actually have rats.
When I was a teenager, I had this strange thing that I would just take night walks in areas with no lights, mostly forested paths. My logic then was facing fears would make me feel better. One night, it was pitch black. I couldn't really see far. So I was doing my thing, and I bump into someone else. I only see him at the last moment. I scream and started running back, only to hear him screaming back at me to come back, chasing me now. I can hear the sound of his footsteps. They eventually become more distant, and I did a Forrest Gump and just kept running. I never went for a night forest walk again. I know I shouldn't have been out there at that time, but the fact that there was a fully grown man there, looking to be in his 50s or 60s doing the same thing, who chased after me just does not make sense. A few years after my father had graduated from SCU, and my mother had graduated from TCU, they both had jobs at a small company in Fort Worth. Having met at a few company parties, they finally got married, and my father gets a job in Colorado for a small but growing engineering company. So off they go, packing up and moving from Fort Worth to Colorado. Getting in a car with these few belongings, they start to make their way to Colorado. Now, I'm not sure where they are, but they take a road instead of a large intersected highway. My mother and father decided to take a smaller not so travelled route on the highway on their final stretch back home to my father's hometown to then catch Highway 14 to their new home. Having driven all day and it being the middle of night, my dad has the idea of pulling off to the side of the road to sleep for a few hours before waking up and finishing the journey. Now there's no rest stops whatsoever as they're on a highway in the middle of nowhere. Now my mum agreed that maybe they should stop, but after 20 minutes she wasn't able to sleep, so instead of sleeping she said she'd drive, allowing my father to be able to rest up a bit. Just to reiterate, this is not a so travelled upon highway. There are no lights and my parents are in the middle of nowhere from the nearest city or town. Not a mile or two down the road, my mum notices something on the side of the road. As she gets closer, she notices it's just a single man in the middle of nowhere with no lights or anything, just walking on the side of the road in the direction of where my parents are parked. There was no broken down car or anything, just this man with nothing but miles around him. My parents wanted to stop and speak to him, but they got very shook. My parents didn't bring it up much and they've ever wondered what happened to him, or what had happened to them if they'd both fallen asleep in their car at the side of the road. Something about the whole situation was just off, and why that guy was out there on his own just doesn't make sense. His intentions couldn't have been good. When I was younger, my brother and I used to go exploring the woods near our home. All of that stopped one day. I've never went to the woods since, and I have a deep fear and some PTSD of seeing pictures of myself. You'll know why. So like I said, me and my brother love exploring the woods and forest around where we live. My mum and dad don't know that we do this. Well, they do, but don't know how far into the woods we go. So on one day after school, like every other, we go for an adventure. We play tag for a little bit and end up going quite far into the forest. Now luckily, my brother knows our way back, so I'm not too worried. I've lost track of where we are. As we're going, he gets this weird feeling that we're being watched. I said to him we should probably get back soon because it's getting dark and it's probably not safe, and that our mum and dad are going to kill us if they know how far out we are. He says, yeah, I think you're right, but something feels wrong. I say, what do you mean? And he says, I don't know, I don't feel like it's safe to go back the normal way. We end up heading in a big loop to get back. As we're walking, my brother says, I think we're in private property now. There's a no trespassing sign up ahead. I think, wow, I never even realised this was territory we weren't allowed in. So we go and take a closer look to see what the sign actually says. Now at first I think my mind's playing tricks on me, because it doesn't look like a sign at all. It's a photo. Maybe it's a logo of the owners or something. My brother says no way and sprints up. He then turns white, and I've never seen him like this before. I have that feeling I'm being watched again. As I get closer I can see why he's so scared. It's a picture of me, with the eyes X'd out in black pen. We both sprinted back. I have honestly never ran so fast in my life, and a lot of it's a blur because I think when you're so scared your mind forces you to shut out certain memories. But I can remember as soon as we got back, we looked out the window to see if we could see anyone or anything. But there's nothing. We both agreed not to tell our parents what had happened because they'd never let us out in the woods again, and even to this day, we never told them. I know how stupid this is looking back on it, but we were kids just trying to not get into trouble. Now since this day, I can't stand going into the woods more than maybe 5 or 10 feet. It's like I have flashbacks and I feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere, even if I'm next to other people or civilization. And if I look at photos quickly and they resemble myself, I start to get cold chills and my adrenaline rises so highly. About 3 months ago, my fiance and I were driving from Oregon to Arizona. We're in a part of Nevada that's in the middle of nowhere. We are on the end of a 70-mile stretch with no cell service and it's about midnight. My wife is small, only 5'1" and 100 pounds. Now it's my wife's turn to drive at this point. I was reclined in my seat out of view sleeping. She shakes me awake and says, "This guy's been following me for a while." I glance behind and see a big truck only 10 feet behind us. I tell her to speed up, figuring he just wanted us to go faster, but he keeps the same distance from us. All of a sudden he shoots into the oncoming lane, overtakes us, then proceeds to slow in front of us, bringing his speed down to about 10. She backs off a considerable distance when he slams on his brakes and starts opening his door. At this point I sit all the way up and roll my window down. He spots me, slams his door shut and takes off. Now I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but if he didn't see me, he would have definitely tried to kidnap my wife. We're very shook up and go to report him to the police at the next gas station. My wife has never drove in the middle of nowhere alone again. I don't know whatever come of the police investigation either. This happened like 16 years ago. I was 12 then. I was in the summer camp of my Boy Scouts troop, but with boys and girls. As we're all in Spain, scouting here is actually quite a liberating thing. One of the most important activities during summer camp is what we call raid. Basically going out of camp to adventurously trek for a couple of days. My friends and I planned an amazing route through a beautiful mountain range called Pieros in the northeast of Spain. 3 days walking, 2 nights sleeping out of the camp. My raid camp consisted of 15 boys and girls between 12 and 13. We took food with us, knew how to read a map and how to build a shelter, how to search for water, and pretty much anything necessary to survive a couple of days, so no adults were camping with us. Our plans for the first day were to climb a mountain that was just under 3,000 meters high, and sleep by a glacial lake near the top. It's a long walk from our camp. I mean, it's probably about 15 miles away. So at about 6, we decide we're not going to reach the lake at the time we predicted. We find a nice place to build a shelter, did it, cook some dinner, and we're in the middle of a beautiful mountain, about 6 miles from the nearest road. Let's add another 5 kilometers more for the closest village. We can't be happier. We still had nearly 2 hours until sunset when we finished our last meal, so we thought it would be a good idea to send a smaller group to clean the dishes and refill water to a spring we had been going past while walking. Now I volunteered to go, and 3 others joined. We got a couple of light torches too, just in case, and head towards a fountain. Night came. While we're on our way back to the shelter, we can hear the rest of our group singing and having fun in the distance. Suddenly, one of my friends stopped and pointed out something by the side of our trail. This wasn't there on our way down, I'm sure, he said. There was a light reflecting pole from the road torn into pieces. We went from being happy and relaxed to mildly scared, and rushed round to see where our friends are. We told them about our creepy finding that night. We were just kids, so fear escalates fast. Who could be hiding in the same mountain range we are, and why? Two of the older guys, who are around 15, think it's a good idea to take a look around and try and calm us. Although being out there without them was even scarier, we also appreciated it. They went away with a light torch and a knife and whistle each. We remained seated inside the shelter, which was nothing more than a couple of tarps held together by sticks near a big boulder. Silent and scared, I remembered hearing quite a lot of sobbing around me. I was thinking that I didn't want to die there. One of the girls suggested we could sing and try and think of something else to try and take our minds off the situation. Some disapproved because we might not hear the whistles, but did so anyway. We spent about 10 or 20 minutes doing so. Then whistling interrupts our singing. We hear it more clearly. 2 whistles coming towards us at a really fast pace. I remember taking my knife from its sheath and keeping it in my hands. Luckily it's our friends. They arrived nervous and exhausted from the run. They told us they stumbled upon a long stick standing with lots of blood over it. More than what our nerves could stand. Most of us are crying, some praying. They then told us that they're going to go back and look for whoever's in the mountain with us and confront him. In case things go bad, we'll run somewhere else so he can't find you, one of them said. We asked them to stay, but nobody's able to move a finger to actually stop them from leaving. There was no more singing, only weeping and barely audible prayers. I don't want to die there. I want to see my family. After a while, we hear some noises, followed by the voices of our friends. They came back at a calm pace with relief in their faces. It's all just a misunderstanding, one explained. It's just a park ranger. We found him. He explained to us that he was just walking around as part of his duty, said the other. The bloody stick was just from a rabbit that he hunted for dinner. It's quite a relief. We relaxed. Someone even spoke about taking out our sleeping bags and going to sleep. That sounds wonderful, but it wasn't long until one of the old guys said he's a bit suspicious. You see, he wasn't wearing a uniform, nor a badge or anything that we could use to identify him. He's not a ranger. And who walks kilometers away from the nearest road late at night to hunt rabbits? Are there even rabbits at this altitude? Terror comes flooding back within seconds now. They're right. The story doesn't make sense. Let's go back there and find him, one of the older guys said. We asked them to stay with us again and get the same result. Once they were gone, someone said that maybe he even followed them and now knew exactly where we are. We all shivered in panic. No one was paying the slightest attention to anyone else anymore. Nobody cried. No one prayed. I remember I only had one thought in my mind. I'd rather kill than get killed in this place. We now wait seated, silent and ready to fight for our lives. We all have our knives out and ready. Minutes passed. Suddenly, we hear people running, approaching. We heard screams of terror. From the sound of it, it's obvious there's more than 2 people coming after us. I've never been so scared in my life. I hope I could say goodbye to my mum, my dad and sister. My knife's ready to stab whoever comes close. We finally saw our 2 friends running for their lives, being followed by 2 men. They came just at the front of the opening of the shelter and stopped. 2 men chased them, doing the same thing. We can see their faces. It turned out our camp leaders were really weird and had been following us, almost like they were excited by people crying, being scared for their lives. So they had taken 13 children to the middle of nowhere, to the point they're holding up knives wanting to kill people. It turns out they got in a lot of trouble after it, and I'm sure they got arrested for some of the things that they had done. Now I know nothing come of this, but I'm more scared by how weird the camp leaders actually were, and that the law got involved after, versus a prank they tried to play on us. Growing up in the central US, I've heard all of the myths and legends about Skinwalkers. I never really gave them any merit up until last week. I've also heard that talking or thinking about them can draw them in, but I gotta tell someone. Please excuse any formatting errors, and this is my first post I'm on mobile. So let me start with some background. My name's Dakota. I'm 26 and have grown up in and around the Southern Rockies and the Superstition Mountains and all of the vast wilderness that is Colorado, Utah, Arizona and New Mexico. All my life I've been drawn to the outdoors, hiking, climbing, biking, rafting, kayaking. You name it, I've done it. I'm very experienced in all these activities and have worked as a guide and survival instructor since 19. I've experienced many strange, possibly paranormal things due to my time in the wilderness, but I'm rambling. So anyway, last Friday, I took some time off for myself, just to get back in tune with the solitude of nature. I packed all my gear, finished going through my checklist, and made sure to let some of the other guides know where I was heading when I'd be back. Then I loaded my gear into my 4-wheeler, made sure my bear, my very sweet and loyal overprotective German Shepherd, was comfy in the passenger seat. He is my lookout, adventure partner and best friend. He never leaves my side, even to the point when I have to use the bathroom. So we set out shortly after 11 AM towards a canyon I'd recently discovered hidden away behind the thick bush and at an apparent rockside. After about 5 hours of driving through the dusty and desolate landscape, the trails continue on between a narrow passage through the mountainous cliffs. When we arrive, I parked the 4-wheeler behind a large outcropping of boulders, took the keys, and covered it with a colored. Not that I was worried about theft. I was probably miles away from the nearest human. I covered it to keep the unforgiving sun to prevent any melting damage. After getting the four-wheeler stashed away, I adorned my pack and my sidearm, a large caliber Desert Eagle. There aren't many animals that you can kill out here, but I had the gun for protection. I surveyed the area. There was thick bush and dry foliage all around us with small foot trails. I cleared them on the four-wheeler and see a large rock pile in front of us. I skirted around the rocks to the very narrow passage in behind the left side. It's a tight squeeze, and I had to remove my pack just to get through it. Now I had to slide and shuffle like this for about 20 feet, with cold jagged rocks against my chest and loose boulders against my back. The trail narrowed near the end, and I had to suck my chest in and wriggle my way out in a large opening in the rocks, where Bear happily waited for me with his head cocked to the side with confusion. He was confused why I struggled so much and he passed so easily. When I finally freed myself from the narrow rock, my jaw dropped. All around me, the cliff is covered in ancient paintings and carvings, some of which I recognize from some Native American sites used as religious sites. But many of these symbols were new to me. The most notable was a large painting near where the trail continued on. It depicted a large figure whose head and antlers resembled that of a deer, but the body was long and narrow, strangest of all, bipedal. It is at times like these that I wish I'd brought some piece of technology like my iPhone, but I usually leave it at home, bring in only an emergency satellite phone. Intrigued, I left the opening and headed on the trail. I was surprised by the steep downward slope that seemed to the heading down further and further into the earth, and I was even more surprised when the trail ended at the mouth of a large cave. It's actually a cave that I didn't know about. This couldn't get any better. I set down my pack, pulled out my flashlight. It was getting pretty dark, so I figured I'd just check out the opening, then settle for the night. I wandered in a few feet and abruptly stopped when the floor dropped down into a chasm. My flashlight barely penetrated the dark abyss below me. Disappointed that I'd need to return another day with my caving gear and possibly a partner, I headed back towards the mouth of the cave, and Bear, who had strangely stayed put, didn't follow me in. He must be tired, I thought, as I suddenly started to realise my own fatigue after nearly 5 hours of driving and 5 of hiking. I started a small fire with some newspaper logs I packed, in which burned for a surprisingly long time. I heated up some water for some dehydrated omelette. After a not very satisfying meal, I unroll my sleeping bag and get comfortable, with the fire by my side and the distant view of the stars peeking between the distant cliff tops that shelter me from the rest of the world. With that peaceful thought, I dozed off to the sound of the crackling fire and Bear snoring beside me. I sleepily checked my watch when I was nudged awake. It's almost 3 in the morning. I softly push Bear's head away from me, nudging me so I can go back to sleep. But that's when, in the dim of the fire, I see that his teeth are now bared, his head low beside me in a protective position. He was starting towards the mouth of the cave with a deep growl emanating from his throat. More alert now, I clumsily grabbed my flashlight and unholstered my pistol. my finger ready to switch off the safety. I mentioned to Bear to be quiet, which was a very handy skill that had taken a lot of time to learn. On command, he quieted, but still snarling at the dark hole in the cliff. I illuminate the edge of the drop-off, my gun aimed with the beam, and we listen. For a few minutes, all I heard besides silence was my heartbeat. Then finally, I heard it. I still can't describe it, but I'll try my best. It sounded like the belt of a goat and the yowl of a wild cat coming together to form words that are broken and foreign. Quiet at first, it's now accompanied by a clacking and scraping sound, getting closer and closer. I strain my eyes to the edge in the light of the beam. What I saw next, I'm sure has been burned into my mind's eyes and I'll never forget it. In the light, there's disgusting long rotten fingers. Something is there up over in the cave. The thing first pulled itself. It's now out of the cave. It's about 6 feet tall, with long deer legs, too skinny to support the weight. The body appeared to be semi-human, but a skeleton draped with rotting flesh, with patches of mangled fur and ribs protruding from its chest. The smell was wretched, and I wanted to look away to vomit and run, but I'm paralyzed with fear. I kept staring at the long cold antlers and the warped and twisted body, long arms hanging loosely in front of the claws scraping the ground, but mostly the disturbing contoured mix of human and animal intertwined to make a face so haunting I remember it to this day. And when it locked into my view, its empty rotted sockets met with my eyes. It lets out some horrifying words. "Let me help you," said very slowly. With that, I snapped out of my paralyzed state, switched off the safety, pulling the trigger twice, then 3 times. In an instant, the horrible thing before me flickered and was 2 feet to the right. I fired again and again, as the thing jerks towards me. Now I really don't remember much of what happened next. Bear barking, us sprinting, flashes of gunfire, the jerking and clanking, the evil voice again. "Let me help you." I just remembered the peak of sunlight, the roar of the side-by-side as me and Bear sped through the desert. We woke up in a shack uninjured, but forever scarred by the experience. It kept me awake every night since, and I needed to tell someone, to warn someone, please. If you ever see carvings or anything in a cave, do not enter.
Hey, leader of the cryptic crew here. Alright, you guys were right. The name is too cheesy. Also, I probably wouldn't be the leader. Casey would. She's got a lot of energy. A few lovely people said they'd like to hear more of our adventures. Thanks for your interest. I've decided to compile a bunch of quick incidents that happened since I moved into my dorm. It's been a busy few weeks, so I can't write much. I've got another 5-page essay due Sunday. First, some background onto my dorm building. It's got a notorious reputation that it's haunted, and I live in the basement. People call the basement the cryptid zone for 2 reasons. The first reason, just because Joe lives at the end of the hall, and there's quite a few people in on that joke. I swear the closer I got to the door with the nameplate Joe on it, the weirder I feel. The other reason is because of the vibes the basement gives off. The first time I showed Tal my room, they nearly stumbled over. The hallway is long, dark, and artificially lit. If you stare down the hall at night, you start to feel dizzy. That's how long it is. The artificial lighting feels absolutely soul draining, and the basement is always freezing. But that's nothing too abnormal. The real spooky thing is the ghost rumours. I have to admit it now. I've always been a skeptic, never really believing in any supernatural stuff. First night I moved in, I couldn't sleep at all. I moved in 3 weeks earlier than everyone else due to a special program at my university. There was only a handful of other kids living in my building. One other person in the basement with me, and she lives on the opposite end of the hall. That first night was terrifying, and I'm not quite sure why. My thoughts raced through my mind. No matter how many blankets I bunched around myself, I was cold, and I kept hearing things. For the first several hours, I convinced myself it was nothing. The creaks and cracks could be explained by the building's weak structure. The walls were paper thin here. But then I heard crying. I jumped out my bed in fear. The first noise was a nose sniffing. Then I heard a hiccup-like sob. They were so quiet, but not like they were muffled by the walls. It was like someone was trying to be quiet. With a trembling hand, I grabbed a knife and a flashlight from my nightstand. Yeah, I have a knife collection. It seemed like a good idea to bring that with me to protect myself in college. I roll out of bed and head towards the empty side of my room. I turn on my flashlight and scan the room. I wanted to leave, because I'm not going to be that stupid white person from the horror movies. Well, I'm not white, but whatever, you get what I'm saying. But I had nowhere to go, and it was 3:30 AM. I walked over to the walls, and pressed my ear against them. Though my hearing does suck, it's not completely gone. I attempted to listen for several minutes, but I didn't hear anything through the extremely thin walls. I didn't have neighbours yet, but my room was empty besides me, so I had to check. It was the only logical move I could make. After a very scary 30 seconds of searching my little dorm room, I admitted defeat and crawled back into bed. The next day, after meeting new people and attempting to make friends before classes officially started, I brought up the ghost rumours to them. They all said they heard the ghost story too. I asked if anyone heard anything weird, and 2 other people in my building, on the 1st and 3rd floor, said they'd heard something crying. A few days later, more weird stuff happened. We were there early for a special program, so we had homework already. One afternoon, I gave up on my stupid work and left it on my desk before leaving. When I got back 3 hours later, the papers were scattered all around my room and all over the floor. I simply joked about this to my friend, saying, "The ghosts must hate this class too." No, nobody else had the key to my room, and I didn't have a roommate yet, no RA, and no cleaning services. One person dismissed my ghost claims by saying it was just the AC moving the paper. My homework being thrown everywhere happens a few times, and sometimes it wasn't just papers, pens, folders, blinders, and even a protein bar once. I haven't known any cold AC units to be able to move protein bars and books. The morning after one of the first nights I stayed over at Casey's room, she told me something that still terrifies me. We were up pretty late, so when I eventually passed out in her arms, I was out. I can be a heavy sleeper at times. We woke to a phone ringing. My mum had tracked my phone, then freaked out when she noticed I wasn't home. Talk about an embarrassing phone call. One that had to happen over FaceTime because we were both hearing impaired. Her ears are much worse than mine. After I'd taken care of the messy parents itch, all Casey said was, "Sorry you got yelled at. She sounds a bit like a helicopter." When she noticed how embarrassed I was, she reassured me with a kiss, then gasped in realization. I asked what was wrong. "Something really weird happened last night, but..." "What? Am I that bad?" I asked jokingly. She shoots me a look that essentially says, "Shut up, idiot." "Just listen for a second. I don't think you'll believe me, but I don't really have anyone else to tell, and well, it did happen to you." When Casey sounds scared, something must be really bad, so I shut up and listened. "Last night, after you fell asleep, you started talking." "Do you talk in your sleep often?" Casey asked, unable to hide her fear in her voice any longer. Unfortunately, I was no help. "No, I never really have. Not to my knowledge at least. And you know how my ex and I used to live together for months? She would have said something." I instantly regretted bringing up my ex with my new girlfriend, but thankfully Casey overlooked it. "Damn," Casey said through gritted teeth. I sat up asking what was wrong. "Okay, well, last night around 3:33, I know because I checked my phone, you started talking in your sleep, but it didn't sound like you." "Casey, what do you mean?" The accent was different. The voice was deeper. You were saying the weirdest stuff too, Casey tried to explain. Like what? I asked. What did I say? You said, "Where's my bag? I left it on the 3rd floor." What do you mean you don't know? What hotel is this? Great service. Seriously, I said that, I asked, perplexed. I vaguely remembered my dreams from the night before. They had everything to do with Casey, very little to do with a hotel. I told him my dreams had nothing to do with a hotel. Yeah, you did. A bunch of other weird stuff too. You sounded like you'd been possessed by someone who died in a hotel. Casey's a firm believer in the supernatural, but I shook my head in disbelief. There's no way. It's not possible. How else do you explain it? We still don't quite know how. The last story I was debating on sharing because it was weird and mildly weird of me to put on the internet, but oh well, here it goes. So 2 days ago, I was exhausted from my early classes, late night studying before. Of course, I went to my dorm room after lunch for a well-deserved nap. Before I passed out, I thought to myself, man, I really should have taken my bra off before getting in bed, but I was too tired to move. I passed out. It was just like that sometimes. When I woke up, my bra was gone, nobody was in the room, and I slept lightly during naps, so I probably would have felt or heard someone. I've never sleepwalked, so I genuinely have no idea what happened to me. So there are those stories that I can think of from the cryptid zone and beyond. Tell me what you think below. Also, I'm thinking about interviewing Joey and posting that next. He's an unusual man, that's for sure. When I asked where he was from when I first met him, he simply said, "I'm from around." He paused, realising he sounded too cryptic. Around here. See you all next time, unless a ghost gets me.
My grandfather told me a story once. As we sat around a campfire in his backyard, in the cool night of the Arizona desert, the horizon is clear. Each star twinkled in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice is raspy and gravelly, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his dark eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. Way back when I was a boy, about your age, I lived outside an Apache reservation with your great-grandfather. He returned from the war, setting about raising cattle. Now, this is on a 100-acre ranch, settled between a mountainside, with dirt good for growing thorn bush and not much else. One night, my mum was sick, and my pa and I took a trip into town, about 50 miles away. Straight through a dry desert, over a washed out creek, and some old abandoned farmsteads. A fire sparked and a log crackled, jolting me out of the story. So Pa and I driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember this dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights out of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember too, when the engine began to sputter and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. "God damn it," Pa said, guiding the Ford to one side of the road as it coasted to a halt. "Stay here, son," he says as he steps out into darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelt it. A rotten smell. Strange, I thought. Why could I smell sulfur in the desert? My nose also picked up on some weird rotten tomato smell, almost like one of the dead bloated cattle from the heat. You know where the crows come and pick holes in the side of them. It was foul and I gagged. My skin began to tingle too, and the back of my neck felt itchy. My face is getting hot. The wind had stopped blowing and hung still and heavy, with the stink filling the cab. "Pa," I called. "Dad." No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt fear in my bones, in my chest. Boy, I tell you, I've never felt anything like it. Not until Vietnam. I lock the door and reach over for my dad's door. I see a shadow bound across the road, through the dim beams of the light, across the partly open doomed hood. My grandfather paused. He spit a fat wad of tobacco off to the side. He looked passively into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath. "So what happened?" He sighs, a creature, and shakes his head. You have to understand that there were legends, older than the rocks of these valleys, older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, than the old Injun chiefs and their shams, the Apache, the Hove, and the Cherokee. All of them old tribes and First Peoples, they told tales, old stories about dark Injun magic, a deal made with old spirits, a blood sacrifice to gain power. Old power, enough to fight each other and the Spaniards, and later the white men who come for their land. They called them. He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath and plodded forward in his towel. Across the fire and the sky and the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun and old mountains. They call them Skinwalkers, shape changers, old warriors resurrected as skinless men, with muscle, walking on deer legs, with the torso of a man, the head of a coyote, but really messed up, with long and malformed snouts, teeth like a bowie knife, long arms, standing 7 foot, even hunched over. They'd got the old cowboys and white riders. They'd run through bullets and sabers, part the Spanish armor like a potato sack. Wily too, and they could change their voice to match a person you might know. Boy, that's when I saw a big and fast. I don't know what it was, only for a second. It runs across the road, grey and molted, muscles flexing under its legs, hooves clomping on the road, stringy muscle hunched over shoulders, and it turned, looking right into the cab and into my eyes, and I swear, boy, it grinned at me. I sank into my seat in shock, in fear, shaken. I knew death was near. The air was erratic. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes and blows a tree. Charged full with power. I yelled for my dad, but no words come out. I was shaken. As my grandfather told his story, he was still here, so I know he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me. Even now, I feel the force of his words. Now, the real power of the Skinwalkers was tricky. They could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide, so they could take others. Not for long, the legend says, maybe an hour before the soul of the skin they wore would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them. though I think getting skinned alive was hell. A minute passes in what felt like a lifetime. 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened and I jerked my head to left, putting my fist up to fend off an attack. "Son, it's me," my dad said, before climbing into his cab. He grasped the steering wheel, pulling himself awkwardly, jerking into the seat. I cringed into the corner looking at him, looking hard. "Boy, your great-grandfather was a good man, treated me and my ma right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed them in the camps. And now, I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run or die? Is it him or not? Let's go get the medicine for your ma," as he pulls the truck into gear, pulling into the side of the road. Our trip resumed. "I guess it was him after all," I said, "but how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom?" "No, boy. I knew because out the window, out of the corner of my eye, I seen that beast running right next to the car, staring at me with them yellowed eyes, grinned mouth, and I saw it, hunched and angry, running next to us. I just looked straight forward and floored it. 'Son,' he said, 'don't look at it.' That's how I knew, boy."
To be perfectly frank, I hate talking to Greg. My particular line of work was pleasant enough to exempt me from much face-to-face contact with him. Unfortunately, of course, some contact is inevitable. "So," Greg sighed, easing his girth into the seat behind him, "why are we having this meeting?" I dropped my slender frame into the opposite chair. You called me in to have a meeting, Greg." He blinked, then sighed in disappointment. "You have a previously undocumented cryptid last week, which was sent to Shailene Mountain. Why was there an undocumented subject in your area?" I tried not to be condescending. Because, well, if we'd known where it was, then it wouldn't have been previously undocumented. All wild subjects has to be undocumented before we can discover them. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and disgust. "I realise that finding these subjects can be frightening, Lisa, but that's no excuse to let it affect your work," he sniffed. "And if you can't do with this job, I'll find someone who can. Everybody else in your position is at least 5'8" and 160 pounds. My blood began to boil, but I'd learned long ago not to show any emotion in front of Greg. I forced a smile. "I can assure you that I wasn't afraid. If you read the reviews from the extraction team and the medical report from the missing boy who I found, everyone gave me glowing reviews." Greg slowly took off his glasses before leaning forward in his chair. "Lisa, I feel you are often a challenge to my authority." I learned to keep my mouth shut in these moments, but I'm sure my face was crimson. Greg sighed. "The subject that you picked up last week, all 167.72 kilograms of it, has been residing in the Shailene Mountains Environmental Niche Reptilian Program. It's several hundred acres of Colorado wilderness that's cleverly blockaded from any civilization entry." I nodded. "Thank you for explaining that, Greg, but I was the lead consultant in designing this particular ENRP." Greg scowled. "We've just got new orders from Washington," he explained gruffly. He tossed a stack of papers across the desk at me. "Doibu needs to clean out his ENRP of all undocumented subjects." I stared at him in confusion. "Clear out? Where do they go?" Greg shrugged. "Last week's subject has chromatically desirable object receptors. I think that's a phrase they used." My jaw dropped. "People like his eye colour." He stared back in contemplation. "When ground into a powder, it's apparently almost 3% less expensive than the lead-in black food colouring." I nearly leapt out of my chair. "You're going to kill him and take his eyes out? Why?" Greg sighed deeply. "The federal government's official position is that it doesn't exist." "What?" I spat. "Of course it exists." Greg shook his head. "The official position is that there's no concrete evidence one way or another." So there cannot be a policy that recognises the existence of the subjects contained within the ENRP at Shaolin Mountain. Therefore, Doibu has been instructed to terminate all subjects therein. I close my eyes and pull several hairs out. If your emotional condition prevents you from being able to complete your task, Lisa, there are stronger people who are capable. I controlled my breathing. It wasn't easy. I'm absolutely fine, Greg. But you see that the order to dispose of something inherently implies that it exists. He blinked several times. The official position is that they do not exist. I sighed. Yes, Look, never mind. If they don't exist, why not simply release him back into the wild? Why are they going to kill him? Greg gazed at me stoically. They're not going to kill him, he said matter-of-factly. You are. I stared back, slack-jawed. Well, that wraps things up, Lisa. He shot a chip of voice. I stood up to walk away, shell-shocked. You know, they really screwed up the name of our department, he explained, mostly to himself as I walked out the door. I turned back to see him brooding and grave. They call it the Department of the Interior, but it only covers the outside stuff. I had been airlifted to Shaolin Mountain in a daze. By the time I'd landed, though, my resolve had returned. Though Greg had come to us in a helicopter, I knew that he was outranked once we landed on the ground. I'm not killing that cryptid, I explained to the man at the gate. I could tell that he was in charge, because everyone around him seemed to be afraid of him. He looked down at me. Okay, he responded simply. I sputtered, yeah, well, so that's it. Sure, he explained. The only reason you were requested is because they wanted the subject to be euthanized humanely. He turned away from me to stare at the Colorado sky. I felt betrayed at this moment. It would be a lot easier without that concern, the man continued, his hands clasped behind his back. A 7mm Winchester ballistic silver tip to the thigh should cause death via hemorrhage within 24 hours. It's far less risky than the tranquilizer they suggested used before termination. Frankly, there's no telling how vicious this wild beast could get while they're men trying to put themselves at risk. 24 hours to die? That would be torture. You don't have to do that. He's not dangerous, I nearly shrieked. He glanced back. Don't worry, he won't be a threat if everyone remains in the jeep. Frankly, I'm glad to hear that you'll be staying out of harm's way. I don't think you realise what you'd be getting into with this monster. You better stay with Greg, where it's safe. My world span. I grabbed my head in my hands and walked away from the group. I focused on the crisp alpine air. I took in the 50-mile view of the wilderness. I thought about why I took this job in the first place. Then I returned to the people in charge. I'll do it, I responded meekly. Give me the tranquilizer gun and the rifle. I blinked away a rogue tear that I was determined not to let them see. But I'll need a bag of red gummy bears to do things right. I bounced back and forth as the jeep drove farther into the wilderness of the Shaolin Mountain ENRP. The rifle slid from side to side in my lap. Did George love Lenny? Mrs. Neese asked as she walked the rows of my 7th grade class. He shot Lenny in the head. Most people declare themselves unable to do that to a person they loved. She stopped pacing, and for reasons I'll never understand, she looked directly at me. But I'll have to ask most people a very specific question. If choosing not to kill someone is a result of your own discomfort, doesn't that mean you love yourself more than you love anyone else? Here she leaned in towards me and seemed to tune everyone else out. If your definition of love isn't completely sacrificing your own comfort, then how would you define it? My hands were too numb to tremble as I filled the bolt-action rifle with its deadly contents. I loaded the chamber with a decisive snap, then returned it to my lap. I had joined Doibu because I love the unknown parts of the world. Fear is power, but only to a certain few, and extracting fear is nothing different from extracting human potential. But sometimes the task of being human requires us to build impossible hope from nothing more than broken pieces. I am being forced to kill something that I love because I love it. That much of my humanity remains intact. I turned away from the rest of the people in the jeep, so I didn't have to hide my tears. The vehicle plunged onwards, unabated, into the hidden forest with the futile goal of finding something more monstrous than what was already in it.
When I was 15, my father and I loved to go camping. This is something we did whenever we had the opportunity. There was some really good forest around where we lived. full of life and sounds. Probably the most peaceful part for my dad at least was the sounds of the nature. It annoyed me, but my father loved it. It made a difference from the mechanical sounds of the job where he worked. So on one particular evening, we do some fishing. We're having a great time looking up at all the stars. The sun's just beginning to set, and you can just about see the northern star in the hemisphere. We decide to call it a night. Now while we're walking back to our camping site, my dad continually stops, not saying why. Now normally I just make fun of him, but I can see that he has his hand on his gun. I know something is wrong. I don't want to scare my dad and act as though I don't notice anything. Every time that we begin walking, we can hear a sound, louder than our own footsteps, that can't be identified as one specific thing. It's hard to describe, but almost like a deep thud, just beyond your range of hearing, but you can still notice it, if that makes sense. So anyway, we continue towards our camp when my dad suddenly shouts out, "Hey, you stop immediately, I have a gun." I ask my dad what's going on. He tells me to be quiet. He says you take one more step and this is your last warning. And with that, gunfire. There's a few moments of silence before my dad grabs my hand and tells me to run. I don't know what's going on and begin crying in fear. What's more strange is we run past our campsite. We run all the way back to where our car is and speed out of there. He tells me to never tell my mum what happened and that he'll explain one day. Now, as you can imagine, this is the most terrifying experience in my life. Eventually my dad did tell me. He said he thought we were being followed by a very large man, but he eventually caught glimpses of something in the moonlight. Now it looks like a person, yes, but upon closer inspection, he can tell that it's definitely not a normal person. He describes it to me as a skinwalker. Now I don't know too much about them, just that they're to be avoided. He said that's when he pulled the trigger. He knows he landed a direct hit on it, or at least within an inch of this creature, and it didn't even move an inch. This is when he made us begin running. So this happened 17 years ago, so please forgive me if the exact details are fuzzy. So it's the summer of 1999. I was spending the vacation with my mother in New Mexico. I was a 12-year-old at the time and had a severe attitude. I made friends easily with a few girls that lived just around the corner from my mum's home. We spent every moment together that summer. We're a group of 4, all of us thinking we were older and smarter than everyone. Nikki, Katie, Julie, and myself were the last generation of home phone lines, playing outside on the trampoline until dark and sleepovers. We would watch VHS tapes, listen to cassette tapes on our Walkman. It was okay to let your children walk around town at night, and we very rarely locked our front door. We had no cell phones or internet. My backyard had a concrete wall around it and a gate. Now behind the wall was desert as far as the eye could see. Just a barren wasteland of dirt, cacti, shrubs and mountains way off in the distance. This town had a major railroad track running straight through it. There was a major street that had a gas station, restaurant and hotels and attractions. We all received the same warnings from our parents. Stay out the desert, stay away from the tracks, and don't walk the main strip at night. Do you think we listened though? Absolutely not. Julie, Nikki, and I spent our days walking through the desert, crossing the tracks down the strip to Katie's home. Sometimes we would just walk around till dusk. Some days, we would go to my home to jump on the trampoline. This particular day, we get to Katie's house prepared to stay the weekend because her parents are out of town. We were gonna have a party. The first few nights, the girls would jump in from a spiral staircase to a giant beanbag. I refused to participate in this, due to my extreme fear of heights. When we got down to the sleepover business, so to say, and decided to watch the original Exorcist, you know, the one with Linda Blair, I didn't sleep. The second night, we all told our parents that Katie's mum was going to drive us to the movies. We all got money from the movies, then promptly walked down to the strip to get junk food. Now, I wish I could say that we're aware of the surroundings, but we're not. We were absolutely oblivious of the man who followed us all the way back to the home. I feel that I should mention that Katie's parents are loaded. They have a huge property with numerous buildings, broken down cars that her dad was remodeling. Their house had a large open kitchen and dining and living room. There were no walls and the whole room was lined with windows. There were 2 doors front and back. The day was just as planned. We get our junk food and make it home safely. We made pizza in the oven, and for some reason, one of the girls turns on the news. As we're eating, we hear a story about staying inside because there's a report of a suspicious man walking on the strip. That's it, suspicious man. We laugh and joke about it. Fast forward a couple of hours. I don't remember what happened, but as girls do, someone said something that hurt Julie's feelings and she storms out of the home. I went after her, opened the front door just in time to see her lighting a cigarette. I sat there with her on a bench while she gone on about the other 2. Suddenly, the air grows thick with anxiety. Julie felt it too. I quietly ask her if she feels as though she's being watched. She responds with a little nod, and then we're blinded. Someone's in a car in the driveway. My heart's racing as I stood up, pulling Julie out of the spot she seems to be stuck in. As we turned to run inside, the man made a sound. I can't describe this sound other than a high-pitched squeal that turned into a growl. I was scared beyond all reason, but somehow I'm able to get myself and Julie inside. The moment we're inside, the headlights go off. It's pitch black again. I lock the door and turn off the light. By now, Julie has regained her composure to tell the other 2 what's happened. As I frantically check the back door and turn every light off, I tell them to be quiet and listen by the back door. I heard the car door close. I was praying to every god that he would go away. Then, right by my cheek, the door handle started to turn slowly, now frantically. I crawl away from the door. I now move over to where my friends are. For the next 2 or 3 hours, we sat still, listening to this man bang on every window or door trying to get inside. The phone was located across the room right next to the 2 windows. I finally got up, gathering the courage to run to the phone. I call my mum. I tell her that we're all alone and someone's trying to breach the house. I hung up with her and waited. Julie screamed to the man that we called the cops, and all of a sudden, the banging stops. We sat there listening to him getting in his car. Then, the sound starts again, that turned into a growl. He's gone now. My mum and stepdad then show up, checking out the place. They found tyre tracks and cigarette butts in the driveway. Whoever this was had been watching us for a while. The truly scary part is all the scratch marks on the windows and doors. Clearly not possible for a human to make. This is why I know it was a skinwalker. Needless to say, Katie spent the rest of the weekend at Nikki's house and had a great story for her parents, which of course they didn't believe. Even to this day, I'm certain this was something supernatural and not a normal person. I just hope they never come back to me.